When a police officer approaches a man peacefully reading a book in a park, he thinks he sees a criminal. He does not pay attention to the peaceful behavior or the lack of evidence. Just the fact that he is black is a reason for suspicion. But this time, the man he arrests is not just an ordinary citizen. His name is Marcus Davis, and he is an FBI agent. All of this will change the way we think about how law enforcement works and what true justice is. The park in the city center was not just a place to relax for Marcus Davis. It was his little island of peace amidst the city noise. Resting on a bench, he held a book in his hands, absorbing every word, every line. Only the soft rustle of leaves and the distant laughter of children disturbed the peace. He loved this park, this simplicity, where he could forget about everything, about his career, about the serious cases of the FBI, about the heavy burden he carried on his shoulders. Here, he could just be himself, without masks and strained smiles. But something was wrong today. His peace was broken by something more real than the usual noise. A look that pierced him from across the alley. He looked up. A policeman was approaching him, almost imperceptibly. There was nothing out of the ordinary about his behavior, but the way the officer's gaze lingered on Marcus betrayed suspicion. "Hello," the officer said as he approached the bench. Marcus responded with a slight nod without getting up. The officer looked suspicious, a cloud of doubt in his eyes. His expression did not show any friendliness. "Do you come here often?" he asked, stepping closer. Marcus could feel that something was wrong. He knew this was not the first time he had been put in this situation. Detention on the basis of fictitious suspicions, unsubstantiated justifications. "I've been through worse, but not today." "I'm just reading," Marcus replied, pointing to the book on his lap. His voice remained even, without anxiety or nervousness. The policeman did not seem satisfied with the answer, which was the first sign that he had already made up his mind. Watching Marcus, he began to nervously scratch the blade of his badge. "Where are your documents?" The question sounded like an order, even though the policeman had not yet made any reasonable requests. Marcus could have pointed out that his rights were being violated, but he felt that this would only cause more unnecessary tension. He knew how difficult it would be to get out of this situation without emotional outbursts. Instead of immediately resisting, he slowly, without rushing, pulled his wallet out of his back pants pocket and handed it to the officer. The officer, as if expecting something, gathered his strength, grabbed the documents and looked at them. His forehead wrinkled when he saw the name on the ID. Wasn't it Marcus Davis? But his brain's trust mechanism didn't kick in. It didn't seem to dwell on the name, and kept thinking about something that couldn't be right. "Stand up," he ordered, pulling up his gloves. Without another word, Marcus stood up and stood calmly, even though it was difficult. He had to maintain his composure even when something was turning in his heart. It was then that the policeman noticed that something was wrong. Why did this man look so calm, even in a situation where he had no right to be on the bench with his documents? Why didn't he try to hide somewhere or run out of the park? But the policeman had already made a conclusion. He didn't need to look for more reasons. "Turn your back to me," he ordered, approaching with a pair of handcuffs in his hand. Marcus was stunned. He could understand a lot of things. He watched the officer act. Why? Why didn't he consider the facts, read the documents carefully? It wasn't just ignorance. It was a clear hostile attitude that crossed the line of professionalism. And although it was a gross violation of his rights to be arrested for no reason, Marcus knew that today he had to be patient. "You have no grounds for arrest," Marcus said, keeping his words calm. He was not going to start a conflict. Even when they handcuffed him, he didn't lose control. "This is unacceptable, and you know it." He pronounced every word clearly, with a palpable weight on his soul. But even here he held his inner core. The officer squeezed the handcuffs again, feeling the pressure, but said nothing. Marcus was not just a man from the park. He was an FBI agent, and he knew this case would end only one way. But it was another day of having to force the system to see the real problem. Could this be the turning point for change? The only answer was that his fight was not over yet. Marcus heard the click of the handcuffs. Calmly, without making any sudden movements, he got into the patrol car, feeling the metal hoops tighten around his wrists. It wasn't the first time he had been arrested for no reason, but each time it was hard. He understood why it was happening. He knew why. But today there was another important reason. He was ready to show why he was arrested. The car drove through the city, but Marcus didn't pay attention to the streets flying by outside the window. He was only thinking about one thing: how this incident would end when the officer realized his mistake. He knew he wouldn't have to wait long. All roads led to his being recognized. The police officer behind the wheel could not understand why Marcus remained so calm. His heart was beating faster as he drove, and his thoughts were jumbled in his head. His actions had consequences, and he felt that he had already made an irreparable mistake. But how to fix it? How to explain what was happening? "What's your name?" the officer asked, looking in the rearview mirror. Marcus did not answer immediately. Did he have the right to say that his real name did not matter? Did he have the right to be himself at that moment? "Marcus Davis," he said coldly, looking the policeman in the eye. His voice did not change. There was everything in that feeling at that moment, pain and silent protest. The policeman became nervous, involuntarily suspecting that something was wrong. He was sure that his suspicions about Marcus were justified. But what if he had made a mistake? What if the man was really innocent? Anxiety began to overtake him, and he swallowed nervously. With each passing minute, his doubts only grew. The car stopped at the police station. With anxiety in his heart, the policeman got out and opened the door on the other side to let Marcus out. "Wait here," he said, and although his words were cold, they carried a certain undefined weight. He hurried inside, and soon another officer appeared. When Marcus was brought into the room, he already realized that this was going to be more than just a mid-case. There was a silence in the room that hung in the air, as if the entire precinct was holding its breath, waiting for something important to happen. "Wait a minute," said one of the officers, looking at the documents on the computer. "This isn't just any ordinary citizen. This is Marcus Davis." He looked up, his voice deeper and more respectful. "Do you know who this is?" The policeman who had brought Marcus in gave him a look that said he didn't know. Everything fell into place. This man was more than a mere suspect. But was it too late? At that moment, a serious officer entered the room. Marcus felt that the situation was changing. "Officer Harkin," the man in the dark suit said seriously, "we have a problem. Do you realize who you've arrested?" The eyes of the policeman, whose name was Harkin, were filled with fear. He was just an ordinary cop, and if not for his stubbornness and suspicion, things might have turned out differently. Now he realized his mistake. But was it too late? This is an FBI agent," he muttered, ready to back down. "There it is," he was told, the answer he hadn't expected. Marcus remained calm, but inwardly felt that the situation was moving in his direction. He had nothing to prove. Marcus Davis stood in front of the police desk, patiently waiting for the officers to prepare for the next steps. The atmosphere in the room was heavy. The tension was palpable even in every breath. After a few minutes, which seemed like an eternity, one of the officers approached him. It was a serious man in a dark suit whom Marcus had seen in the corridors before, but he didn't know his name yet. "You have no idea the situation we're in right now," said the man, who looked much more composed than the others. "But don't worry, we'll figure it out." Marcus could feel his calmness beginning to be tested. Throughout the incident, he had tried to maintain his composure, but every glance from the police and every unnecessary action pushed him to the brink. Although he remained calm, a storm was raging inside him. How did this happen? Why, despite all his achievements, did he remain for these people just a black man in the park? Again, the tall officer tried to assess the situation, asking for details. "I know who you are, Mr. Davis," he said, looking down at the papers. "We should have found out sooner." Marcus did not answer. He didn't want to point out the obvious, that this wasn't about who he represented, it was about what happened in the park, and that the incident was caused by the way he looked. "But now it's become more complicated," the officer continued, wondering what the next step would be. "Maybe I shouldn't have acted so hastily. But this is a police matter." Marcus walked to the window, looking out at the night city reflected in the glass. He thought about his experience again. It was no longer about him alone. He was on a mission. His main task was to fight for change, because this behavior of the police was undoubtedly unacceptable. By noting the details, Marcus realized that not only this police officer, but the system around him supported an endless cycle of prejudice. Few officers were willing to take a step back and question their own beliefs. A few minutes later, another person entered the room, a woman in a captain's uniform. She looked more calm, but her gaze was firmer than the others. She quickly assessed the situation and didn't even seem to look at Marcus, but simply gathered all the information in the room. "Harkin," she said coldly, approaching the policeman who had brought Marcus in, "this is no longer just a question for you. The situation looks much more serious than you could have imagined. And now you need to admit your mistake." Everyone in the room felt the energy change. The captain turned out to be the link that could change everything. She was not only steadfast in her decisions, but also recognized the importance of her own responsibility for the situation. This was important for the officer, and even more important for those he was arresting. "I'm sorry, Mr. Davis," she said, finally turning to Marcus. "I realize this shouldn't be part of your experience, but there will definitely be an investigation. I can't say how it will affect our future cooperation, but I want you to know that your situation is an example of how the system needs to change." Marcus did not respond immediately. He felt the importance of her words, but he was sure that these changes had to go deeper. Most people on the ground have a bad habit of judging by appearances. However, real change started with the realization that the problems here are not so much in individual cases, but in the very structure that allows this to exist. "I just want it to never happen again," he said quietly. "Not for me, but for others." The captain nodded, looking at him with understanding. "Your words are heard. This is a beginning, and things will change." Policeman Harkin stood silently, watching this dialogue. He could already feel the weight hanging over him. He couldn't turn back, but he couldn't shield himself either, even if he was ashamed. No matter what happened, he now had to understand the importance of every decision he made, because now he was not just facing his colleagues, he was facing the entire system. "Now let's get back to how to resolve this issue further," the captain continued, calmly. "But everyone must be aware that what happened, and we can't let it go unnoticed." Marcus stayed where he was, his mind eager to think more seriously. Real change, he realized, begins with each of us. But today, as he sat here, all their actions had a deep meaning. They had to mark the moment from which everything would change. The next morning, the police station was filled with new vibrations. Although everything remained the same on the outside, the importance of the changes was already tangible. Everyone was talking about the Marcus Davis incident, and while most officers tried to remain calm, some could not hide their doubts. Change was inevitable, and even those who had previously stood by the old ways were beginning to question their vision of the situation. Marcus, meanwhile, remained relatively calm. All his thoughts were focused on one thing: what to do to prevent this story from becoming just another case that would disappear in a few weeks when everyone forgot. He needed a result. He needed this situation to be the beginning of a change in the system where such cases would not happen again. In the morning, Marcus visited the polling station again. This time, he decided to meet with the supervisor instead of the police officer who made the mistake. He knew that this meeting would be important for his case. He needed to find out if they were really ready to make real changes. Captain Laura Bennett, who had stated the importance of change yesterday, was already waiting for him in her office. She was stoic, showed no emotion, but was deeply interested in ensuring that the incident did not go unchallenged. "Come in, Mr. Davis," she said, pointing to a chair across the room. "I hope you're not too tired after all that talking." Marcus sat down, his face remaining calm, although tension could be seen in his eyes. He understood the importance of this moment, but he knew he couldn't afford to let up. "I've been thinking about everything," he began, looking at the captain. "You've taken a step toward change, but I want to know if you're ready to go further. This is not just an incident. This is a systemic issue. I don't want this to be just one case that leads to a few conversations and that's it. We have to make this fundamental." The captain nodded, understanding what he was saying. "I understand your concern, Mr. Davis. And it's important. Officer Harkin made a serious mistake, and it can't just be left to chance. I have talked about change, and we are working on it, but this is just the beginning. Reforms take time, but I am ready to act." "It's not a question of time," Marcus replied, not slowing down. "It's a question of the will to change. What are you doing to make the changes inevitable, to make the police realize their own responsibility, to make them realize that we cannot allow prejudice to detain innocent people?" The captain looked at him, her eyes serious. "That's right," she said, thoughtfully. "We're already revising the training program to include racial bias and de-escalation techniques. We are working on new systems for monitoring and controlling officers' performance. But it is also important that officers themselves begin to understand how important this is for them, how it affects people's trust in the police. Therefore, we have to deal with cultural changes within the department. They have to start realizing that if they don't change, it will become a problem not only for us, but also for them." Marcus thought about it. He realized that this was a step forward, but he couldn't stop at one step. "What are you going to do with Harkin?" he asked, even though he already knew the answer. "It is difficult to make decisions, but in this case we will have to fire him. His actions were irresponsible, and we can't leave someone like that in the police force. If we didn't take action, it could call into question everything we're trying to do." Marcus nodded. It was the right move, although not one that is celebrated. He could have changed, he said quietly, but in his case, that's not possible. He has exceeded his authority. The captain didn't answer, but her face showed understanding. She picked up her phone and started dialing. I will contact you when we decide on the final steps, she said, continuing to dial the number on her phone. Marcus looked around the room again. He knew that their conversation would not resolve all the issues, but it was an important moment for everyone. He could have left while the captain was on the phone, but he stayed seated. He was in no hurry. This moment was important not only for him, but also for the future. The captain turned to him, hanging up the phone. I will contact you in the coming days. We will continue to work on reforms, but this incident will be the basis for all future changes. Marcus nodded again. He still had work to do. But now he knew that, however small, these steps were already doing their job. Change was beginning, and he was ready to see it through. The week after the events at the police station changed the atmosphere in the city. The decision made by Captain Bennett was not only the beginning of an investigation, but also a catalyst for profound change. For Marcus Davis, this was an important achievement, but he knew that the real fight was just beginning. The police department began implementing new programs focused on de-escalation, recognizing racial bias, and interacting with people who may feel heightened anxiety due to the presence of police officers. The training became mandatory for all officers. And while Captain Bennett and her team had taken the first step toward change, each officer still had to go through their own transformation for real change to be possible. Marcus, realizing the importance of his contribution, continued to work on this issue. He did not stay on the sidelines and did not forget that he had a mission, justice for all. He knew that change was only possible through open dialogue and hard, constant work. His role was not limited to demanding the truth, but also to help those who were ready for change. He had to meet with all kinds of people, both those who worked in the police and those who had been brought to their knees by the system too often. A few days after Officer Harkin was fired, Captain Bennett invited Marcus to meet with her again. They met in her office. This time the atmosphere was less tense, though certainly no less serious. We've made some progress, Bennett said as she led Marcus to a chair, but the reforms are slow, as predicted. And while we have managed to implement most of the changes, there is still much work to be done. Marcus nodded, feeling how important every conversation like this was. I can see that you're making changes, he said, but is there a real willingness to change on the part of the department? What will happen to those who don't want to change? The captain did not smile. She pursed her lips, thinking. We've been asking this question since the beginning, she said, and I can tell you that it's working. Will it be an easy path? No. Many in our department don't want to admit their mistakes, and some are still not ready to make serious changes. Nevertheless, we continue to put pressure. I personally work with such people to show them that if they don't adapt, don't understand the importance of these changes, they simply won't be part of this department anymore. Marcus listened to her words, and while he didn't quite believe that everyone could change, he also realized that the captain was really trying to make a difference. She wasn't just standing still. It's not an easy process, he said, but I'm sure that if we can change just one person, one structure, it will be a step in the right direction. The captain nodded. I agree, she said. It's more than just a theoretical change. It's about how we can come together and take a step towards truly serving the community. And yes, I believe we can make a difference in this department. And the whole city. Marcus felt that this meeting gave him another boost. He knew that his fight for justice was not limited to this case. But every step forward was important. A few days after the meeting, Marcus received a message about a new initiative. The department had decided to hold a public event to address racial bias among police officers. Bennett invited Marcus to be one of the keynote speakers at the event to share his experiences and insights. The event was held in a large hall with many citizens and police officers in attendance. Bennett started the event with an introduction and then gave the floor to Marcus. Marcus took the stage and all eyes were on him. It was hard to stay calm, but he gathered himself and started to speak. I'm not sitting here in front of you because I want to build my career. I'm sitting here because I've been through a lot. And what happened in the park was not an accident. It was a reality that millions of people face. I don't want it to be just a story about me. I want it to be a lesson for all of us. Only together can we overcome the problems of prejudice and create a system where there is no place for violence and discrimination. Marcus paused, giving his words time to sink into the hearts of those present. And we all, as part of this community, have to be responsible for what is happening. Not just rely on changes coming from above. Only each of us can make this world a better place. His words left a deep mark on people's souls. It was the moment when true understanding began to penetrate hearts, and there was no turning back. After the event, Marcus stayed standing near the stage and was approached by one of the police officers. It was the officer who had witnessed his arrest in the park. There was something new in this policeman's eyes, understanding. "You're right," he said quietly. "Maybe I could have done more. And maybe I now realize why this is important for all of us. I will work on myself." Marcus nodded, and a brief flash of hope flashed in his eyes. This step was another one in the direction of great change.